Now, in this last 20-30 minutes, we have become aware of what is DPDP Act and what is DPDP rules. Now, let us see how to implement this. This period is very short. Actually, there are a lot of things to be discussed about the rules, for which my organization, we have made training programs. We are giving certification courses also. So the training program basically covers for 3 days, in which all the rules and the nuances of the rules, which are told to the participants, and they know how to implement those things for the organizations. So phase-wise approach, it is not a single activity. We can say it is a program. You can, in your organization, I think you must have taken up implementation of ISMS, most of the organizations. I think most of the organizations, they have taken up implementation of ISO 27001, which the mother of all cybersecurity standards. That is the basic standard, which is there, 27001, which has got 93 controls. So when you take up implementation of ISO 27001, you call it Information Security Management System, ISMS implementation. So that also becomes a project for the organization. And then when you implement the project, you get the ISMS implemented. It is something like this. DPDPA, it is not a single activity. It is a bunch of activities, and it involves people, process, and technology. Phase-wise approach, it will reduce compliance risk, prioritize efforts, show measurable progress, and align with ISO and existing GRC practices. So what we've done here at NTM. Yeah, I was talking about this. Now it is okay, Rudramani?
Yes.
Yeah, so we are divided into 6 phases. Phase 1, initiation and a scope definition, data discovery, lawful basis and notice and consent, rights and grievance management, security controls and vendor governance, breach management and ongoing governance. So basically, if you see the rules, which are the 23 rules and the 7 schedules which are there, that needs to be implemented in the organization. So how do we do this? So first of all, we have some initiation and scope definition. So depending on the size of the organization, depending on the context of the organization, we need to see what kind of digital personal data is being processed. Then we define the scope. Are you using systems? Are you using apps? Do you have different departments who deal with different kinds of personal data? So the scope has to be fixed. Basically, what we are fixing here, the boundary in the organization. Okay, we have got maybe 10 departments, but not all the 10 departments we are having personal data. HR is doing personal data, finance is doing personal data. So all those departments has to be brought under the scope. And what are the systems and what are the apps which is handling personal data? Then appoint internal DP owner. There has to be a steering group. There has to be a steering committee. The mandate has to be given to the group or the owner to implement the DPDP Act. Then we decide about the integration with ISO 27000 or GRC. Now, supposing you're already having an existing governance risk and compliance framework in your organization, naturally, this particular DPDP Act cannot work in silo. It has to be integrated with the existing thing. I was seeing the statistics the other day. People are talking about ISO 27001, implementation of ISO 27001 and implementation of ISO 27701. Now, I'm not telling that this is mandatory to have 27001, but supposing you're having 27001 and you're having 93 controls there, the statistics says that 65 to 70% of the controls which are required for DPDPA under the rule number 6 are already present in the organization. So see, it is already there in the organization. So we need to integrate. We need to integrate with the existing ISMS or with the integrate with the existing frameworks which are already adopted in the organization. Then perform high-level DPDP gap assessment. Yeah. When you're talking about high level, then yes, you have to see whether that consent management framework is there or not, DPO is there or not, whether we have a data breach notification. How do you handle the data breach notifications? Who is handling data breach notification? The higher level gap assessment has to be done, whether that data breach notification infra or the procedure is there for you or not. What are the kinds of policy do you have for digital personal data protection? So maybe some of the policies are already existing, some of the policies which are not there. So there is the place where we come in as consultants. We'll tell you, okay, you're already having this, so you don't have to work on this policy again. Maybe we have to tweak the policy to include data breaches. Maybe we have to put certain more controls which are already there in your security policy. So those things we need to do the gap assessment. So once we do that, what are the deliverables which we have? We have DPDP scope statement, stakeholder owner matrix, and the gap assessment summary. Phase two, data discovery and mapping. Understand where personal data lives and flows. Create personal data inventory, as we have done for our security purpose. Also, we need to have the inventory of all the assets. So whatever data is there in the organization, we need to have inventory. We have to segregate which data are the personal data. Those has to be identified. And we have to identify data principles, whether they're customers, employees, users. We need to have the flow diagram. We have to map the data flow across applications, cloud, SaaS, third-party vendors. Nowadays, ecosystems have become very complex. Previously, in many organizations, what we used to have a finance department itself where we used to process the data. But nowadays, if you see many startups, they are outsourcing the data processing activity altogether. So we have to map all those things and make a data flow diagram. Identify backups, logs, archives. It is not only live data, what data you have backed up, what are the logs you're having, what are the archives you're having. A lot of personal and sensitive data are kept in this, kept on those things, but it goes into the back of the mind, I mean, uh, when we are talking about customers, employees, and user data, we only talk about the applications, but what about the backups? What about the logs? What about the archives? Then classify data by type and risks. So after this process, what do we have? Personal data inventory registers, data flow diagrams, data classification summary. Now we talk about the lawful basis. Now that this is a legal thing. So people ask me, what is the relation of between DPDP and 27001 and 27701? When you're talking about 27001, we're talking about information security. When we're talking about 27701, we're talking about privacy. But when you talk about DPDPA, here the main input is the legal issue, the legal angles. So this is what the phase 3 is, something new for you. The notices, what kind of notice a fiduciary is supposed to give it to the principals. In the notice, what are the things which need to be covered, and the language of the notices and the consent has to be legal, because finally we are going to comply with the DPDPA rules or the law which is there in the country. So identify consent-based and legitimate use processing, redesign consent mechanisms. If you're already having consent mechanisms, redesign them. Draft DPDPA compliant notices. Get it approved by your legal team. Update privacy policies. Get it approved by your legal team. Plan consent withdrawal mechanism. End of it, you will have compliant privacy notice, consent records and workflows, updated privacy policy. Define processes for the rights and grievance management. I think if I'm not mistaken, we have got something in 27,000 about the reviews, the management reviews and other things. So in that, the feedback loop is also there from the different stakeholders. So it is something similar here. The rights and the grievance management enable data principals right in practice. Define processes for access request, correction request, eraser request. All those things has to be very defined and specific. We cannot say that, okay, you delete my data. You have to give the option to the user what data you are keeping in the organization. You're keeping the name of the employee, the date of birth, the email ID, your PAN number, your Aadhaar number, all those things have to be very specific. Those days are gone when you used to say, okay, we are capturing some data and we delete some personal data. No, the Act talks about data in very specific format. So your consent management has to be very specific. Your notices has to be very specific. Your request for access, correction request has to be very, very specific and granular. So implement grievance redressal mechanisms, define identity verification steps, create request tracking and logging. Rights requests, standard operating procedure needs to be in place. Grievance handling process needs to be in place. Request tracking registers should be there. Then we come to the phase 5, security controls and vendor governance, protect personal data and manage risk, third-party risk. When you're talking about security controls and the vendor governance, this has become a very important part of any organization and every organization, I feel. The third-party risk management, how you're doing it. So that has to be reviewed and standard security controls need to be put in place. We need to review or get it audited or verified for access control, encryption, logging and monitoring, identify data processes and vendors, update vendor contracts with DPDPA clauses, define data retention and deletion rules for the third party and the vendor for the vendors, operationalize secure deletion. The key deliverables are security control mapping, vendor DPDPA clauses, and data retention and deletion policy. Finally, we're coming to the phase 6, the final phase, the breach management and the governance. Prepare for incidents and sustain compliance. Key activities, define personal data breach criteria. What is the criteria? How do you define this is a data breach? So that has to be defined. Establish breach response plan. First of all, you have to respond to the breach immediately to contain the breach, to roll back the systems. So that plan has to be established. Define notification workflows. Now comes the notification part. Breaches happens. Who will notify? What is the hierarchy? Who will finally notify you have to notify the data protection board for the breaches. And there is a certain timeline also there in the rules. Within 72 hours, you need to apprise the principals and the data protection board both. Identify if organization qualifies as SDF. Plan data protection impact analysis, if applicable. Conduct awareness training. Breach response plan are the deliverables. Governance structure is deliverable and training records. There will be a certain amount of training also required in your timeline when you're managing this phases implementation. A certain amount of training has to be given for the act. Certain amount of training has to be given for the rules. Certain amount of training has to be given for DPOs and how to do this impact analysis and how to review and how to integrate with the existing frameworks. And supposing you don't have any controls at all, then actually some training has to be given on the safeguards also. So timeline, I will say small organizations, it may take 6 to 8 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks, 6 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months. But yet it depends on the organization. Alignment with ISO and GRC, security control, privacy extension. DPDPA talks about legal compliance. And yes, the tools like which Assertive is having, I just have a small question. If any organization has implemented ISMS, then how you are managing all the policies, how you are managing all the processes, how you are managing all the inventory, how you are managing all the risks which are there, then how do you manage all the controls and how you test all the controls and all those things in the ecosystem which is required for implementation of a standard. How do you do it? That is the main question here. So for that reason only the tool providers or facilitators like Assertive, they come into picture. Uh, Assertive is such a tool that you start from the policies and you go to the control testing, you go to the compliance, you go to the assessment, you go to third-party assessment. All those things can happen in a particular tool. So that's what the GRC tools are required. DPDPA works best when embedded into a existing GRC program. Don't try to make it a separate DPDPA a program, it has to be integrated with your existing frameworks. Treating DPDP as documentation only, ignoring the common implementation mistakes we are talking about. Treating DPDP as documentation only. It is not only documentation, it has to be implemented. It is not something which you document and then you show it to the data protection board. Yes, we have done this and it is documented. No, that will not help you. Any breaches, any grievances, or any mistakes or any leakages which happens will be penalized under the act. So it will not say you that, okay, we have implemented ISO 27, we have implemented ISO 27701, we have implemented DPDP also, and how we implemented, we have done these steps which is there in the documentation. That will not help. Ignoring legacy systems and backups. This is one of the mistakes people make in my in the previous organization which I'm consulting. They took care of all the workflow, all the online systems, but they ignored the systems and the backups and the legacy systems. Over collecting personal data, yes. Now that data fiduciary obligation, one of the obligation of the data fiduciary is that they will collect the data which is required only. They'll not take any more data than what is required for processing. That means if you don't require a copy of Aadhaar, or if you don't require the Aadhaar number for identification of an individual, then you're not supposed to collect it. If if you see examples like one of the most frequent examples which come to my mind is that apps which are getting installed on the mobile phone, they ask you for permissions. They want permission for contact information. They want permissions for your messages. They want permission for your microphone, other things. So if you see, they are also trying to collect data from you, right? So those things will not be overlooked once the DPDPA Act comes. The data which are not supposed to be collected by an app or a system or by a data fiduciary has to be stopped. We cannot collect it and we cannot justify that. Weak vendor governance, yes. We always say that, okay, I am fine, but I have got data in Azure, I have got data in AWS. They have to take care of their area. No, that will not help you once any breaches or other things which happens. It is the responsibility of the data fiduciary, the overall responsibility of the data breaches and the problems which occur due to data uh, leakages will be borne by the data fiduciary. No operational ownership. Who is the owner of this particular data, personal data? That has to be operational ownership has to be identified. So what DPDP really looks like: clear scope and ownership, documented and working processes, enabled data principles right, strong security and vendor controls, evidence available for auditors and regulators. This is what I wanted to tell you in the phases, phase 1 to 6. I've got certain more slides for policies. What are some of the policies which are required? These are generally the policies which organizations already have, or if they don't have, they prepare these policies. And like information security policy, data processing and vendor management policies, employee privacy policy, cross-border policies. Then conditional and context-specific policies like children's personal data protection policy, data protection impact assessment policy, training and awareness policy, data governance and accountability policies. Then once we have the policy in place, we need to have some processes. So I've identified some of the processes here. These are some of the main important processes which we need to have. Some of the controls I have listed out from my own mind, which came to me. These are the controls which we need to have in place. So DPDP compliance is not about fear of penalties. It is about trust, accountability, and data discipline.
Thank you for your valuable insights, Mr. Sudhanshuji.